Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere cold, muddy, and slightly miserable. You're a medieval peasant, trudging home through slush that soaks through your threadbare shoes, beneath skies that have been gray since well forever. The wind slices through your cloak like a butter knife, through chilled turnip stew, and your nose has lost all sensation. Welcome to winter specifically, to the kind of winter nights that lasted months and felt like years. This is the part of history no one writes poems about. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing how far this sleepy little village reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You finally reach the edge of your village where the rooftops sag under snow, and the paths between houses are a mess of sludge and manure. Your home a one-room hut, shared with 7 relatives. A chicken and whatever crawled in last night is somehow colder inside than out. There's no insulation, no fireplace chimney yet, and definitely no welcome mat. Just a wood door that creaks open and smacks into something vaguely alive in the dark. You step inside. Instantly, your nostrils are hit with that signature medieval blend: smoke-wet straw, unwashed humanity, and something suspiciously turnip adjacent. Someone's already fed the fire with damp wood, so a thick gray fog coils just under the rafters. You duck instinctively, coughing, eyes watering as you wave away the worst of it. And yes, your eyes are red, not from sentiment, but from carbon monoxide flirting with your brain cells. Good times. In the corner, your grandmother is rocking in a rough chair made from 3 different chairs, wrapped in a blanket that might once have been a curtain or a potato sack. Her teeth are long gone, but she clicks her gums like she's still chewing on something. She eyes you without much expression. Get them boots off, you're dragging half the field in. You obey, dropping your shoes by the door, mud, caked on one the other, already sprouting mold. The floor is just packed earth, so who's counting? You sit by the hearth. Fire, of course, is generous. It's really more of a suggestion. A few embers glow in a pile of half-burned branches, and the occasional spark dances upward before being swallowed by the smoke blanket hanging overhead. You stretch your fingers toward it anyway. Here's a fun historical tidbit. In some villages, it was tradition to keep a small fire going all night, not for heat, but as a sort of spiritual anchor, a symbol of life against the endless cold. And also to keep the rats slightly less bold. Your stomach rumbles. Dinner is coming, which means something hot and beige. Probably pottage, a soupy mix of grains, water, and whatever root vegetable survived last week's frost. Sometimes there's meat in it, which could be anything from actual animal to the boot leather someone tried to boil soft. Historians still argue whether the average peasant diet was barely enough to survive or surprisingly balanced, considering the circumstances. There's evidence of nutrient deficiencies and chronic hunger, yes, but also of occasional feast days where calories made a heroic comeback, usually involving beer and regrettable dancing. You pull your cloak tighter. It's made from coarse wool, dyed a sickly brown by either walnut shells or the fact that it's never been washed. Every peasant wore something similar, and every peasant itched constantly. But the worst part of this first hour isn't the cold or the mud or the existential despair creeping in. It's the knowledge that you've got at least 12 more hours of this darkness ahead, and nothing to do except not freeze, not starve, and not get stepped on by the goat again. In modern life, boredom is a luxury. Back then, it was a weapon winter used against your spirit. You'd sit on a wooden stool, blink at the fire, and wonder how the rich people lived. Probably not sleeping with chickens, that's for sure. Still, there's a strange comfort to it. The rhythms are predictable. The fire will be poked. The stew will be stirred. The lice will be scratched. Someone will fart, and no one will mention it. That's just life here. And maybe if the stars align, you'll get one more night of quiet, uneventful survival. And really, that's the dream. Your toes are finally starting to regain feeling, which is both a blessing and a curse, because now you can tell just how cold they still are. Someone once said that wool socks could save a man's life. Sadly, you've only got one, and it has more holes than thread. You shuffle over to a bench covered in straw and wool scraps, a makeshift layering system that doubles as bedding when night finally sinks in. The air inside the hut is barely warmer than outside, and your breath comes out in cloudy little puffs. Your breath, by the way, is one of the warmest things in the room. Layering is essential. You pull on an old tunic frayed at the elbows and wrap a second cloak over your first. Wool trousers go over linen underthings that haven't been truly white since the king was a baby. On top of it all, you drape a rough woolen blanket across your shoulders like a half-frozen monk. You're warm now in theory, but you still feel like a goose that's been plucked out of spite. Now, medieval peasants didn't have wardrobes in the modern sense. What you wore in winter was more or less all the clothing you owned. Historians still argue whether peasants had seasonal outfits or simply layered everything like a walking laundry basket during winter months. Some records suggest people even slept in their work clothes because undressing meant risking frostbite and dignity all at once. You glance around the room. Your younger brother is already curled up near the hearth, wrapped so tightly in a woolen wrap, he looks like a moth in a cocoon. Your mother's adjusting a patch over the leaky thatch in the corner, trying to stop the constant drip that's been refilling the same bucket since last week. Despite the discomfort, there's a peculiar normalcy here. Everyone knows their role. You shiver quietly. Your brother snores. Your mother curses the roof in a rhythm so familiar it's practically a lullaby. You sit back down near the fire, or what passes for one. The smoke stings your eyes again, which reminds you that medieval homes rarely had chimneys. The lucky few had smoke holes in the roof, but most peasants just lived in a kind of permanent barbecue. The upside: the smoke did a decent job of fumigating your lice and discouraging certain indoor birds. The downside: chronic lung issues and eyes that constantly looked like you just chopped a bushel of onions. Here's your quirky historical tidbit of the night. In some parts of Europe, it was believed that you should never fully extinguish your home's fire because doing so would allow evil spirits to enter through the hearth. Of course, it could also be a convenient way of telling kids to stop wasting wood. As you settle into your wool cocoon, someone passes around a small jar of salve made from goose fat and herbs. It smells vaguely like a barnyard wrapped in peppermint. You dab a little on your chapped fingers, trying not to think about what other parts of the goose were used for. The conversation tonight is light. Your father mentions that old Willem tried to fix the village well and fell in. Again. Someone jokes that the pigs are smarter than most people. At least they know when to hibernate. A neighbor chimes in through the thin wall with a loud, wet sneeze, followed by a muttered curse. Ah, winter in close quarters, the soundscape of the season. Laughter is rare, but you hear it anyway. Not because things are funny, frankly they're not, but because laughing is warmer than crying, and no one wants to waste moisture on tears. Humor here is dry and sharp, like the frost on the well bucket. It's born from discomfort and stubborn endurance. You glance out through a slit in the wall where a thin leather flap serves as a window. Outside, the world has gone gray-blue and still. Snow is falling again, quiet, relentless, blanketing everything in the same hushed threat. You know that snow is pretty from a distance, but also that it means more work, more danger, and more frozen everything tomorrow. You wrap yourself tighter. The day is done, the work is done. There's nothing left but to sit and survive until dawn. And as strange as it sounds, you start to feel almost okay. Like your body has finally resigned itself to the cold and your brain has gone into medieval sleep mode. You're not exactly warm, not quite safe, but you're here. And that's enough. The fire sputters. Not dies, just makes that sad coughing noise that fires make when they're barely clinging to life, like a man with pneumonia, reciting poetry. You poke at it with a burnt stick, rearranging half-charred logs, in hopes they'll suddenly decide to be cooperative. They won't. At this point in the night, the room is dim and filled with soft, crackling sounds, the occasional cough and the flutter of your mother's shawl as she stirs the coals again. Smoke continues to curl lazily up and around the rafters, only half interested in escaping through the roof's smoke hole. A sleeping chicken shifts near the wall and mutters something foul in its dreams. The fire is the center of your world. Now, not just physically, but symbolically. In the medieval peasant household, everything happened around it: cooking, praying, storytelling, and even midwife visits, should a baby decide to be born inconveniently during a blizzard. It's also where you hang your clothes to dry, though. In this case, dry means less wet than before. A pair of socks sizzle gently over the embers, giving off a scent that somehow combines wool feet and sorrow. You'd remove them, but your fingers are stiff and numb, and honestly, you've accepted the risk of them catching fire as an acceptable trade-off for vaguely warm toes. Historians still debate whether peasants truly centered their entire winter routines around the hearth, or whether it's just that the rest of the house was so unpleasant there wasn't much competition. Regardless, one thing's for certain: fires were precious. If it went out in the middle of the night, someone, usually the least lucky family member, had to trudge through the snow to a neighbor's hut with a clay pot and a prayer. Your quirky fact of the hour: some households actually kept a small smoldering log tucked under ashes all night, known as the banked fire, to ensure it stayed alive. It's the medieval version of a pilot light, except if it went out, hypothermia wasn't far behind. As the firelight dances, it paints shadows on the walls, shadows that wobble and lean like drunken villagers at a feast. You're probably not the only one seeing things in those shadows. Your grandmother insists she once saw the devil himself in the flames. He had goat legs and a taste for barley. You suspect she was just dehydrated at the time, but you don't argue. You breathe in through your nose, bad idea. Smoke instantly invades your lungs. You cough so violently, the chicken startles awake flaps and launches a feather into the air like a snowy firework. No one else moves. This is normal. The children have curled together on one side of the hearth, tangled like sleepy puppies. Your cousin snoring gently, with his mouth wide open, will probably inhale half the smoke tonight and blame his headache on evil air tomorrow. In medieval thought, smoke could be both blessing and curse. It kept out evil spirits, but also gave you what we'd now call chronic bronchitis, or worse. You lay back, letting the glow of the fire flicker on your eyelids. The room around you is soft, now blurry with fatigue and flickering orange light. There's no electricity, no candles to waste, just the smothered glow of charred logs and the wet wood's occasional protest. It might surprise you to learn that even wealthier medieval homes often didn't have chimneys until the late Middle Ages. Peasants. They were decades, sometimes centuries behind those trends. Instead, smoke drifted upward and out through thatch or crude vents. The upside, it helped preserve the roof from insects. The downside, you're breathing it constantly. Still, you wouldn't dream of putting the fire out. It's the heart of your home, even if it's a smoky, asthmatic heart that hisses and coughs like a cat in a rain barrel. You shift closer, careful not to crush the small basket of kindling beside you. It's your turn to keep watch tonight. The fire must not die. That's your task. You sigh, rest your chin on your knees, and try to ignore the sound of your stomach slowly chewing itself. The fire crackles defiant. You stare into it. And for a moment, despite the smoke, the hunger, the chill, and the fact that your left foot might have gone fully numb, it's almost beautiful. Dinner time arrives not with a bang, but with a slosh. Your mother ladles something into a wooden bowl and hands it to you without ceremony. It's pottage. Again, the great culinary equalizer of medieval winter. You stare into the steaming beige abyss, oats, turnips, and some wilted greens that may have once been cabbage. Maybe. You're not entirely sure anymore. You spoon it up slowly, careful not to spill anything on your only shirt. It tastes warm. That's about the nicest thing you can say. But in winter, warmth is flavor. The roots are mushy, the broth thin, and the greens slightly bitter, but the heat chases away the chill in your chest. For medieval peasants, this was standard fare. A mix of whatever survived the harvest: barley leeks, beans, onions boiled until even your teeth gave up. Meat, a luxury. Most winter stews didn't have a single shred of animal in them, unless it had already gone slightly questionable. If you were lucky, you got a bone to gnaw on. If you were really lucky, it wasn't human. Historians still argue whether the peasant diet was shockingly nutritious or quietly starving them. While grains and vegetables did provide some essential nutrients, the monotony and seasonal limitations often left people malnourished. Rickets, scurvy, and anemia weren't strangers to your average winter table. Your quirky tidbit of the hour: some recipes included hedgehog. Yes, the small, spiny creature, roasted whole after being rolled in clay, which when cracked open, peeled off the spines. You try not to think about that as you swallow another spoonful of glop that might or might not contain traces of root vegetable. Dinner's a group event. Everyone eats together seated around the fire, dipping shared wooden spoons into a communal pot. Hygiene is theoretical. You're not sure if your cousin washed his hands this week? Probably not. But honestly, neither did you. There's a rhythm to the way people eat here, fast, quiet, and focused. Hunger does that. No one wastes food. Even the crusted edge of bread gets scraped clean, and the pot will be rinsed with hot water and drunk like soup. Sometimes there's bread to go with the pottage, but not today. The last loaf molded 3 days ago, and no one felt up to scraping it off. There's talk of baking more tomorrow, if the miller's donkey hasn't frozen solid. That's a real risk, by the way. You scrape the bottom of the bowl and sigh. Hunger isn't gone, it just steps back a little like a debt collector that agrees to come back at dawn. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, the silence stretches. People lick their spoons, swish the last drops of broth around their mouths, and glance at each other with shared exhaustion. The chicken mutters again, and someone farts quietly. It's acknowledged with one raised eyebrow and nothing more. You lean back against the wall. It's cold. You wonder if castle kitchens ever run out of salt. Probably not. Those rich folks with their roast geese and saffron cakes have no idea what it's like to dream about onions. And yes, peasants dreamed about onions, especially fried ones. Those were the stuff of fantasy, only seen at fairs or stolen from noble kitchens when no one was watching. Your mother clears the bowls, stacking them on a shelf that leans slightly to the left. A rat peeks out from behind it, sniffs and scurries back into the shadows. You pretend not to notice. So does everyone else. After dinner comes the chores. Yes, even in the dark, you carry a bucket to the door and scoop snow to melt later. It crunches under your fingers, pure and soft, like the only clean thing in your world. It'll serve as water for tomorrow's stew, assuming no goat steps in it overnight. You return and sit back down. Around your legs. Everyone smells a little like smoke and sweat, but there's something comforting about it. Familiar. Like an old, slightly damp blanket you still love anyway. And then comes the ritual. Someone pulls out the salt jar, a tiny wooden container half filled with precious white grains. A pinch is sprinkled into the ashes of the hearth, an old protection charm for warmth. And no ghosts, your grandmother mumbles. You believe her. Maybe not the ghost part, but the warmth. You'll take all the magic you can get. When the time finally comes to sleep, you rise from your spot by the fire and glance toward your bed. A generous word for a pile of straw and cloth tucked in the corner of the room. It doesn't look inviting. It looks itchy and damp and possibly sentient. Your younger brother is already burrowed into it like a particularly irritable badger. You nudge him and he growls something incoherent before grudgingly shifting over just enough to make room for your knees. It's not personal, there's just not much room to go around. Medieval peasant beds were communal, not cozy. Most families slept in a single pile, a tangled mess of limbs, cloaks, and assorted smells. And you do mean smells. It's a potluck of unwashed feet, sheep wool oils, dried mud smoke, and something faintly rodent-like that may or may not be the actual rodent that stole part of last night's bread crust. You lay down slowly. The straw pokes through the thin cloth layer and scratches your back. Somewhere under your shoulder is something hard. A pebble, a spoon, a tiny ghost. You don't have the energy to investigate. Beds were rarely private. Curtains, if they existed, were for the gentry. You've got a wool blanket, a snoring cousin, and an aggressive goose that occasionally wanders in from the cold. She doesn't bite much. Quirky tidbit for the night. Some medieval beds were literally wooden boxes filled with straw, and people would climb in and put a lid over themselves for warmth. Like human soup. If you think that sounds terrible, remember it's warmer than what you've got now. You shift, trying to find a spot that doesn't feel like it's stabbing you. Your brother coughs into your ear. Across the room, someone lets out a loud snore, followed by a murmur about haunted potatoes. Your grandmother, wrapped in what looks like 4 cloaks and half a rug, is muttering a bedtime prayer in Latin, which none of you understand, but all of you accept as important. Historians still argue whether peasant homes really kept animals inside for warmth, or whether it was just necessity. You know the answer. You're currently making eye contact with a goat. He blinks slowly, like he knows your soul, and disapproves. You pull the blanket tighter. It's made from homespun wool, scratchy and stiff, but it's the best thing you own. If you had 2, you'd be royalty. If it had a full corner, you'd be a saint. The fire behind you pops. You feel the faintest whisper of heat against your back. Not enough to warm you, but just enough to remind you that cold exists. You're not sure if that's comforting or cruel. Another issue with sleeping in a peasant house. The bugs. Fleas, lice, and sometimes bed bugs. Though the term bed bug feels generous. These are medieval bugs. They've survived plagues. They have vendettas. You try not to scratch, but your scalp feels like it's throwing a tantrum. You sigh and roll onto your side facing the wall. A little breeze pushes through a crack in the boards. You pretend it's not there. Your cousin sneezes violently in his sleep and mumbles about dragons. You scoot closer to the fireside. Your brother farts and immediately goes back to dreaming about stew. It's fine. It's all fine. There's a certain closeness to it all. You're packed in tight. But there's something undeniably human about sharing your breath, your warmth, and your general discomfort with your entire family. It's intimacy of the least romantic kind, but it means something. You're alive, together. And anyway, the alternative is freezing to death, alone in the forest, while a wolf decides whether your thigh is worth the effort. So you take the lice and the snoring and the goat's judgy eyes. You take it all. Eventually your eyelids start to droop. The room is quiet now, just the occasional crackle of the fire, the shuffle of sleeping bodies, and the whistle of the wind against the walls. You think about tomorrow. You think about chopping wood, hauling water, stirring gruel, shoveling slush. But those are tomorrow's problems. Tonight you're here, wrapped in half a rug, half a sibling, and a full body itch you choose to ignore. You let the straw cradle you, the wool wrap you, the sounds of the hut lull you. And for a few quiet, scratchy hours, you sleep. You wake up to the sound of whispering, not the ominous kind, just the usual half-muttered pre-sunrise nonsense of a grandmother who's been up for 2 hours and refuses to accept that the rest of the house isn't ready to socialize. She's telling a story. Again. Your eyes flutter open, lashes stiff with cold, and the room greets you like an old frenemy. The fire's a smudge of red embers now. The goat is curled near the door. Your brother's foot is pressed firmly against your cheek. Good morning. You shift upright, shivering beneath your cloak, and tune into the tale in progress. Granny is rocking slowly, staring into nothing, her voice low and raspy like an ancient crow that learned to speak. She's in the middle of recounting a ghost story, this one about a spectral chicken that screams whenever someone in the village is going to die. Someone behind you mutters, weirdly specific. Someone else replies, she's not wrong about the last 3. This is your entertainment. No books, no radios, no scrolls of parchment, unless you're unusually literate. What fills the long, dark hours is story, oral history, gossip, legends, superstitions, and the occasional questionable recollection of events that might have been dreams. Historians still argue whether storytelling in medieval homes was more entertainment or education. But you know it's both. In a world without printed instruction manuals, you learn how to live and not die through the tales passed down from the wrinkliest person in the room. Quirky tidbit time. Some families believed that if you told stories after sunset, spirits would gather to listen, which might explain why Granny pauses occasionally to squint at dark corners. Just in case. She moves on to another tale, this one about the devil disguising himself as a wandering friar to steal a farmer's soul in exchange for a bottomless stew pot. The moral isn't clear, but you assume it's don't trust strangers with excellent cookware. The younger kids are rapt, big eyes reflecting the dim glow of the embers. Even the goat seems mildly intrigued, or maybe he's just waiting for someone to feed him a turnip peel. You shift on the straw and glance toward the dark window flap. Still no light. It could be 3 in the morning or 5, doesn't matter. Winter blurs time like smoke blurs vision. Your cousin throws in his own story. He swears he saw a pale woman in the woods last week, her eyes glowing red and her feet leaving no tracks. She was humming, he whispers dramatically. I heard it in my teeth. Someone scoffs. You were drunk on sour ale and peeing on a tree. Exactly, he says. That's when they get you. Superstitions are the seasoning of peasant life. Without them, things are just cold and muddy. With them, they're cold, muddy, and haunted. You've heard stories about trees that bleed cats, that predict death, and lakes that whisper names at night. Not all tales are spooky. Some are historical, or at least pretending to be. Like the story of the man who once walked from your village to the capital and saw a knight fall off his horse and cry. That one gets better with every retelling. In this version, the knight also dropped his sword and was chased by a goose. You lean back, letting the voices swirl around you. There's a rhythm to it like waves in a sea of straw and wool and smoke. The stories keep the night soft. They remind you that other people have survived this darkness before, and others will survive it after. And maybe, just maybe, you'll survive it too. It's still dark, but your fingers are finally flexible again, which means it's time for games. Not the joyful kind. These are peasant games born from boredom, fueled by competition, and ending, more often than not, in petty arguments over non-existent prizes. And yet they are the highlight of a winter evening. You roll over, yank a crudely carved die from under the straw, and nudge your cousin with it. You up for a throw, you whisper. He grunts and pulls out a splintered game board, more a plank, with scratch marks than a finished product. But it'll do, it always does. You sit cross-legged by the hearth, where the embers give just enough light to play. The game is simple. Roll, the bones, move. The pebbles pretend to understand the rules and accuse each other of cheating in the most creative way possible. Gambling, despite what the church liked to preach, was wildly popular in peasant circles. Dice games, tile games, and improvised board games were common ways to pass long winter nights, even if there was nothing to win except pride. And maybe the last turnip peel? Someone always walked away insulted. Tonight the stakes are high. The loser has to feed the goat in the morning. And the goat, he bites. You take your turn. The dice clatter across the dirt floor and land, with one just barely touching a chicken feather. Immediate debate erupts. That's a foul roll, your cousin insists. No, it's divine intervention, you counter. The argument lasts longer than the next 3 rounds, during which your uncle wakes up, grumbles about heathen children, and steals the dice for a round of his own. Just like that, you've got 4 players and at least one person keeping score with a stick in the dirt. Historians still argue how widespread gambling was among peasants, or whether it was frowned upon by local authorities. But we have enough records, fines, confiscated dice, and angry sermons to know it was happening regularly, and no one gambled like a bored farmer stuck inside with his relatives. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some dice were made from animal bones, often knuckle bones from sheep or pigs. The term casting lots. Yep, that's where it comes from. So technically you're playing with dinner's cousin. A fun thought. The game escalates. Now there's a side bet involving who can recite the longest nonsense rhyme without breaking. Your brother sings a grotesque verse about a duck that married a rat and raised 14 muddy children. You're in awe, mostly at the rhyming. Someone plays a tune on a tiny wooden flute. It's not good. In fact, it sounds like a goose trying to beg for mercy. But it fills the air, and that's something. Your grandmother joins the fray, rolling the dice with a suspicious amount of luck. You accuse her of witchcraft, to which she replies, "If I were a witch, you'd be a goat by now." Fair enough. Eventually the game fizzles out, not because anyone wins, but because people begin to fall asleep mid-round. One cousin nods off with his hand still on the game piece. The goat steps on the board and ends the match by eating a corner of it. But you don't mind. The warmth of the moment lingers longer than the firelight. For a little while, you forgot about the cold, the chores, the hunger. You even forgot your itchy shirt. You lie back on your bed of straw bones, clicking gently beneath you. The game board now serves as a pillow for your brother. Someone hums the duck rat song again. And in the cozy, smoke-thick air, you smile. Because in the heart of winter, when the nights stretch long and the wind moans like a disappointed priest, sometimes the best weapon you have is a game of chance, and a family willing to play it badly. Your fingers are sore, your arms ache, and the room smells faintly of boiled wool and scorched goose fat. That can only mean one thing at spinning night. You slide over to the low stool near the hearth, where your mother has already begun feeding a thick tangle of wool onto the drop spindle. The spindle itself spins lazily, wobbling like it's half asleep, which, to be fair, so are you. Tonight the women are working the flax and wool stash, spinning fibers into thread by the soft orange flicker of the embers. You join them, grabbing a tuft of carded wool and slowly pulling it into a strand between your fingers. Your thumb slips. The strand breaks. A sigh from your left tells you your aunt saw it. Try it again, slower this time. She mutters, "Let the wool breathe." You didn't realize wool could suffocate, but you nod like you understand. Spinning was a vital part of peasant winter life, especially for women. With limited daylight and no field work to manage, winter evenings were the perfect time for domestic labor, and few chores were more time-consuming, necessary, and tedious than spinning. Historians still argue whether spinning was a form of economic empowerment or just another layer of unpaid domestic duty, but there's no debate about this. Households depended on it. Clothes didn't just appear, you spun every thread wove, every yard stitched, every seam, and wore it until it disintegrated or walked away on its own. And this process, it takes forever. You feed more wool into your spindle. It catches, you twist, it holds. Victory. Well, temporary victory. You've made about 6 inches of thread in 20 minutes. If you were faster, this might qualify as meditative. Instead, it's mostly just slow. Quirky fact. In some places, spinning wheels weren't introduced until centuries after the drop spindle. This means that for most medieval peasants, each thread of clothing literally passed through their fingers, sometimes for weeks. And don't even ask how long it took to make a single sock. The rhythmic sounds of the spindles fill the room. Soft whirs, gentle taps as they touch the floor. The occasional whispered curse when a thread snaps. It's a sleepy kind of music, like the room itself is humming. Conversation flows with the spinning. Gossip is shared, who's marrying who was caught stealing apples, who might be pregnant, and whether or not old widow Hilda is secretly a witch again. You join in, if only to stay awake. You mention that a pig wandered into the churchyard last week. Your aunt gasps like it's a scandal. Your grandmother snorts. Wasn't the pig that was the problem? It was what it saw in there. Someone mutters a quick prayer. Someone else laughs nervously. A thread breaks. You start spinning again. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters. Inside, the fire hisses and shrinks. A kettle of water sits near the coals, not quite boiling its surface, barely stirring. It'll be your drinking water tomorrow, assuming no one kicks it over in the night. The girls keep spinning. You keep spinning. You stretch, Roll your shoulders and try not to think about how many cloaks you still need to repair. Your mother reminds you that St. Distaff's Day is approaching the traditional end of the spinning season, but only for people rich enough to pretend spinning ends. As your pile of wool dwindles, your lap fills with thread, a thin, slightly lumpy cord that smells faintly of sheep and smoke. You'll twist it into skeins later, then pass it on to someone else for weaving. And maybe by spring, it'll be a pair of breeches or a shirt. Maybe. Your aunt leans in and examines your work. Not bad, she says. You'll keep us clothed after all. You feel something warm bloom in your chest. Not pride exactly, more like usefulness. In a world where survival depends on shared work, being useful is everything. The spinning slows. People yawn. Someone lets the spindle roll gently to the floor and curls up in a corner. Summer and autumn were for planting and harvest, but winter gave you time. Historians still argue whether these were official church weddings or more informal community vows. Some couples simply declared their union before witnesses and went straight to the stew pot. You lean against the wall, soaking in the atmosphere. It's not a party by modern standards. No cake, no band, no awkward cousins making bad toasts. But it's festive in its own way. Someone passes around a jug of ale that tastes like sadness and apples. You take a sip and try not to grimace. The quirky tidbit of the night. In some rural areas, the wedding bed was blessed by the whole village. Literally. People would follow the couple to their home and chant blessings at the bedroom door. Sometimes they'd throw in jokes, sometimes turnips. Tonight's celebration is more subdued. Your arms protest as you finally stop fingers twitching like they still want to twist. You tuck your wool away, stretch out near the hearth, and rest your head on a folded cloak. The thread you made tonight will last longer than you do. And somehow, that feels just right. The flicker of candlelight catches your eye, and you turn to see something surprisingly rare for a peasant household: a celebration. Someone's getting married. Tonight. In the middle of winter. Indoors. It's not grand, there's no music except a single lute that's badly out of tune and possibly missing a string, but there's warmth in the room, both literal and emotional. A few extra candles burn, casting golden light over the couple, two villagers, in their best tunics, cheeks flushed from firelight and maybe nerves. The bride is wearing a crown of dried herbs. The groom, a wool cloak that actually matches his shoes. Fancy. Winter weddings were surprisingly common among peasants. There's laughter, sure, and a bit of dancing, if you count shuffling in circles and trying not to fall into the fire pit as dancing, but it's mostly about companionship. You realize quickly that warmth isn't just about fire. It's about bodies in a room talking, breathing, being alive together. You sidle up to the bride, who beams in her homemade dress. It's dyed with something that was supposed to be blue but came out gray. She looks radiant anyway. Cold night for a wedding, you say. Perfect night, she replies. No bugs? Fair point. The groom gives a heartfelt speech that's mostly about surviving last winter's flood and how this marriage probably won't be harder than that. He gets a few nods, one snort, and a pat on the back from the village elder who's clearly had too much of the apple ale. Outside, snow drifts gently. Inside, the fire burns brighter than usual. Someone's managed to snag a little meat rabbit, maybe, or something braver. You lie down, head buzzing, stomach full of mystery meat and slightly fermented cider. And just before your eyes close, you hear the bride's voice from behind the curtain. If your feet are cold, don't touch me with them. You smile. Some things never change. The wedding glow fades by morning, or what passes for morning in a medieval winter. There's no sun, just a lighter shade of gray pressing against the thatched roof, and a chorus of sneezing from every corner of the room. Someone groans. Someone else trips over the goat. And then music. Not the elegant sound of a court lute, mind you, but something wobbling and deeply out of tune. You peek through bleary eyes to find your cousin tuning his homemade fiddle, one string tight, the other two somewhere between whine and moan. The instrument itself may have started life as part of a doorframe. He draws the bow across the strings. It sounds like a deer arguing with a bagpipe. Beautiful. New song, he announces proudly. A small pot bubbles, and the smell wraps the room in something delicious and rare hope. You realize that events like these small, imperfect human are what make winter survivable. They remind everyone there's life on the other side of the freeze. Births, weddings, new beginnings. Even if those beginnings are wrapped in wool and blessed by a slightly drunk farmer. The dancing starts again, and you're pulled into the circle whether you want to or not. Hands grab yours, and your feet stumble to the beat of foot stomps and off-key humming. Your fingers are freezing, but your heart feels warm. It's ridiculous. It's lovely. Eventually, the couple disappears behind a curtain, and everyone cheers. Someone makes a joke about goats getting jealous. You can't tell if the goat in the room hears it, but it definitely narrows its eyes. The ale runs out. The fire dims. The celebration winds down, replaced by the quiet rustle of people finding their straw piles again. Wrote it about a turnip I lost last year. A few sleepy chuckles ripple through the room. You sit up, rubbing your face, and wrap your cloak tighter. The air is frigid. The fire needs feeding, and your stomach is already considering mutiny. Before chores begin, people gather loosely near the hearth. Someone uncorks a small jug of weak ale, brown sour, and slightly warmer than the air. You take a sip, then instantly regret it. But it wakes you up, and that's something. Ale was a staple of peasant diets, even for breakfast. Water wasn't always safe to drink, so most folks went with small ale, a weak, low-alcohol brew that gave you calories, hydration, and just enough buzz to forget you slept next to a goat with gas. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were constantly mildly drunk or just used to bad flavors. You'd say it's probably both. Quirky fact of the hour. Some rural households brewed ale with herbs like yarrow, mugwort, or even tree bark. Not because it tasted good, because it was available. If it didn't kill you, it went in the pot. The music continues. Your cousin stomps one booted foot, encouraging clapping. A few people join in. A toddler starts spinning in slow, wobbly circles and topples over with a thud. The room cheers. You look around. Half your neighbors are still wrapped in cloaks. One man is brushing straw from his beard, and someone else is trying to fix a cracked mug with beeswax and prayers. The mood is light, almost giddy. The hangovers are minor. For once, there's no immediate crisis. These moments, silly, noisy, oddly cozy, are rare. Most of your life is labor, hauling, digging, feeding, mending. But sometimes when winter gets long and survival turns into routine, people find joy in scraps. A half-tune, a homemade jug, a song about vegetables lost and found. You grab a scrap of bread from a shared plate. It's stale enough to use as a weapon, but you gnaw it anyway. Someone offers a slice of dried apple, an actual delicacy, and you pretend to refuse before taking it. In the corner, a group starts singing a bawdy song about a milkmaid, a chimney, and a goat. You don't understand the lyrics. You're not sure anyone does. But the melody is infectious. You hum along. You can feel it in your chest. This strange, muddy joy. There's no feast. No feast day. Just a cold, normal winter morning. But music makes it lighter. Not warm exactly, but warmer than silence. You realize suddenly that this is survival too. Not just the bread and boots and firewood, the laughter, the bad fiddle, the dancing toddler. These are the things that remind people they're still human. And even if the music is terrible, and let's be honest, it's a sound that belongs to you, not the lords in their stone halls, not the church with its bells and incense, just you and your village, and this moment of shared noise. The goat lets out a long, judgmental bleat. You applaud anyway. You're drifting off again, full stomach, half smile, warmth from the fire soaking your knees when the bell rings. Not a doorbell, not an alarm, a church bell. Deep, slow, ancient. It rolls through the air like thunder wrapped in wool. Everyone freezes, even the goat. You sit up instinctively, rubbing your arms, though the sound itself isn't threatening. It's just heavy. You feel it in your ribs. 3 rings. Then silence. It's midnight prayers. In your village, even the tiniest church has a bell. Not for glamour, and definitely not for punctuality. No one has a clock. The bell is time. It tells you when to work, when to stop, when to pray, and sometimes when to grieve. Tonight, it's for the dead, or at least the recently departed, or possibly just a reminder not to become one. The priest lives a few houses over. A quiet man who smells like beeswax and mild despair. He rings the bell most nights, sometimes to mark an hour, sometimes to chase away spirits. No one asks which. You assume it's a bit of both. Historians still debate how closely peasants followed religious schedules. Did they actually rise at matins? Did they pause for vespers? The records are murky. But everyone agrees that the sound of the church bell shaped daily life, even if no one got up to chant psalms at 3:00 a.m. You stretch your legs, joints cracking like ancient furniture. A few people around you whisper quiet blessings. Your grandmother crosses herself with a sigh and mutters a prayer in Latin that includes the word libera. You assume it means protect us from dying in our sleep. Outside, the bell's echo fades. The silence that follows is louder. And then another noise. A baby crying in the next hut over. A dog barking, a door slamming against the wind. Life continuing. You settle back down into your straw heart slightly heavier. Not sad exactly, just aware that death is always nearby. And not in a spooky way, just there, like snow, like damp wood, like winter. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some villages, bells weren't just for the living. They were believed to frighten away the devil and other evil spirits. It's why death bells were rung after someone died, to escort the soul protected and remind the dark things to keep their distance. The fire pops again, a bit too loud. You flinch. The goat flinches. Your brother doesn't move. The hut begins to breathe again. Someone stirs the embers, someone refolds a blanket, and someone, probably your aunt, starts snoring again, as if nothing ever happened. But you lie there listening, not just to the room, but to the wind outside, and the slow creak of the rafters, and the way the snow hushes the entire world. Midnight in winter has a particular flavor, not fear exactly, but awareness. That time is passing. That every day is a small act of defiance against the cold. That you're still here, that others aren't. And as you lie there bundled in threadbare wool, surrounded by people you both love and occasionally want to smother with a turnip, you whisper a little blessing of your own, just in case. It's not exactly morning yet, but nature doesn't care. Something shifts nearby. A shuffle, a grunt, then the unmistakable snort of a pig, followed closely by the softer cluck of a very awake chicken. You open your eyes and are instantly met by a goose staring at you judgmentally. Again. Yes, the animals are up, and unfortunately that means you're up too. See, in a medieval peasant's winter home, the animals didn't have a separate barn or a cozy little stable out back. Nope. They lived with you. All of them. Because the animals needed warmth, you needed what little warmth they gave off. And everybody needed to avoid a frozen goat situation. You sit up brushing straw off your shoulder and look around. In one corner, the pig is rooting through someone's boot. The chicken has perched triumphantly on a stool. A sheep is chewing something that was probably once your cousin's sock. The goat, your constant companion, stands in the doorway, like he's waiting for someone to serve him tea. And to be honest, you're used to it. Historians still argue whether this was a temporary winter setup or a full-time lifestyle choice. But for most peasants, it wasn't about choice. If your animals died of cold, you died of starvation. So into the house they came. You don't love the smell, but you also don't love famine. So, compromise. Your quirky fact of the hour. In some regions, people actually slept on top of hay lofts, inside the same space as their livestock. Not out of love for the cow, but because heat rises and cows make excellent snoring furnaces. The downsides: noise, smell, fleas, the constant risk of stepping in something unpleasant in the dark, and the ever-present possibility of a chicken laying an egg directly into your pillow. You stretch your arms and glance toward the hearth. where someone is already stirring the fire back to life. The pig sneezes. You dodge instinctively. Your brother groans. The goat ate my hat again. Better the hat than your fingers, your aunt mumbles, pulling her cloak tighter. There's a weird worn-out rhythm to the morning chaos. Someone throws a few scraps of hay into the corner. Someone else opens the door briefly to scoop snow into a bucket. The pig squeals. The chicken lays an egg. The goose honks at absolutely nothing. You tie a cloth around your nose and try to locate your shoes. One is under the goat and the other appears to be inside the goat's water trough. Fantastic. As much as the animals annoy you, they're also part of the family. They provide eggs, milk, and sometimes meat. They're more valuable than most objects you own. You'd risk your own comfort to keep them alive. And in return, they share your space, your warmth, and occasionally your sleeping mat. You shake your head trying to dislodge the fog. Beside you, your brother stirs. You were mumbling again, he says groggily. Something about cheese demons. Dreams, you mutter, just dreams. But in your village, dreams are never just dreams. You glance toward the ceiling where a dried bundle of herbs dangles over the hearth, a charm meant to ward off nightmares. Lavender, maybe. Or thyme. Or possibly just weeds someone said were magical. Your grandmother sits up squinting at the flames. Did you feel it? She rasps. Something walked through the house last night. Here we go. Dreams in the Middle Ages weren't private affairs. They were messages, warnings, predictions, sometimes jokes from mischievous spirits. If you dreamed of water, someone was pregnant. If you dreamed of fire, someone was cursed. If you dreamed of cheese demons, honestly, you didn't ask. You sit near the hearth again, rubbing your feet by the growing flame. The air's still thick with the earthy aroma of hay smoke, wool, and livestock. You stopped noticing it a long time ago. Eventually, the goat nudges your side, demanding breakfast. You hand him a peel of dried turnip, which he eats with loud satisfaction. It's loud, it's smelly, it's chaotic, but it's yours. And honestly, on a cold winter morning, you'd take a crowded, animal-filled hut over an empty frozen barn any day. You try to go back to sleep, but something tugs at your brain. It's not a sound, though someone is definitely snoring like a wheezy accordion. It's a feeling, a heaviness in the room, a sense that something's off. And then it hits you, the dreams. Last nights were strange. Twisting corridors, whispering fields, your childhood goat dressed as a monk, and behind it all an odd ringing like distant bells or someone clinking a spoon against a pewter cup. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed dreams were supernatural or just treated them like gossip, entertaining, but not binding. You suspect it's both. Dreams were one of the few places where peasants had power to interpret, to imagine, to tell stories that might mean something. Here's your quirky fact. Some people slept with little crosses under their pillows to ward off evil dreams. Others sprinkled holy water on their beds. You've got a lump of salt and an old horseshoe near your straw pile. Just in case, you shuffle to the hearth and splash a bit of snow water on your face. Cold, sharp, real. The dream fog clings, but not for long. Your mother is stirring something in the pot, oats and onion skins probably. The air smells earthy and faintly sweet like burning roots and wood smoke. You breathe deep, then crack. A loud pop from the fire sends sparks skittering into the air. You all jump. Your cousin shrieks. That's it. I knew the spirit was still here. It's just green wood, your mother says, flatly, not looking up. Spirit of poor firewood. But still there's a ripple of tension in the room. Just a little. People glance sideways. Someone mutters a prayer. Someone else tucks a charm into their sleeve. Better safe than possessed. You eat quietly, the bowl warm against your fingers. The goat is chewing on its reflection in a puddle. The pig sneezes. Again. Outside, the wind picks up. A branch thumps against the roof. You flinch. So does the chicken. You're not sure if it's superstition, shared trauma, or just the cumulative effect of one too many winter nights. But the fear of what lingers in the dark never fully disappears. That's why people hang charms. That's why salt lines doorways. That's why no one ever talks about the abandoned house on the hill. You stare at the last spoonful of your breakfast, then glance up at the herbs above the fire. Maybe tonight you'll sleep better. Maybe not. But one thing's for sure, if the cheese demon comes back, he'd better bring a snack. The knock comes just before dawn. It's not urgent, just a slow, heavy thud against the wooden door. Once. Twice. Then silence. You don't move right away. No one does. The entire room seems to hold its breath. Even the goat freezes mid-chew. Your father rises first, pulling on his cloak and unlatching the door. A gust of wind blows in icy and sharp along with the village. Elder, his beard crusted with frost, his eyes sunken. There's been a death, he says simply. The room absorbs the words like the straw soaks in the cold. Everyone nods, no wailing, no gasps. Just that quiet winter knowledge, another one gone. Death in winter is expected. When the nights are long and the roofs leak, when food runs low and fevers rise, someone always slips away. Sometimes it's the old. Sometimes it's the very young. This time it's a middle-aged weaver whose cough had turned wet 2 weeks ago. Your family begins moving. Not frantic, but practiced. Someone grabs a shovel. Someone else bundles wool around their hands. You are given a task. Go with the burial group. You nod and pull on your boots, still damp, still half frozen. The cold bites your ankles. You wrap a scarf around your mouth and step into the pre-dawn murk. Outside, the world is a muted gray. Snow crunches beneath your feet as you and 5 others make your way up the hill toward the churchyard. Your breath comes in clouds. One man carries a wooden stretcher. Another mutters a prayer under his breath. Historians still argue how formalized peasant funerals were. Some records describe simple processions and shallow graves, while others suggest layers of ritual charm and folklore. What is clear when death came in winter, you didn't delay. The ground got harder with each passing day. Your quirky fact: in especially frozen seasons, some villages stored the dead in an outbuilding or a corpse barn until the soil could be broken. It sounds horrific, but to them it was practical, respectful. icy ground was more stubborn than grief. You reach the graveyard, just a clearing near the chapel, marked with wooden crosses and the occasional rough stone. The burial spot has already been chosen near the east wall where the sun might reach sooner in spring. You take up the spade. The dirt beneath the snow is like stone. Every swing jolts your shoulders. Your fingers go numb. Still, you dig. So do the others. No words, no laments. Just the sound of metal scraping against ice-hardened earth. The wind howls once, then fades. Eventually a hole is made, shallow, uneven enough. The body is lowered in, wrapped in cloth. No coffin. Just wool and silence. The priest speaks a blessing, his voice hoarse, his fingers twitching in the cold. He sprinkles water from a cracked jug, the droplets freezing mid-fall. The man's name is said aloud. Once, twice, then never again. You cover the grave. The snow falls gently. Then the moment passes. The group disperses footsteps, trailing down the hill, like the last breath of a song. You stand alone for a moment, the shovel heavy in your hand, your lungs full of ice, and something else, something heavier. Death is not dramatic here. It is not rare. It's just winter. You walk back slowly, passing the same goats and fences, the same smoke trails curling from roofs. Life resumes like a machine, clunky but unstoppable. And when you return to the hut, the fire is lit, the stew is on, and your grandmother is already complaining that no one fed the chickens, because the world keeps turning, even in the cold. The day drags on gray and slow, like honey poured in snow. You spend it doing everything and nothing, patching a tear in your cloak, mending a worn basket, staring at a log as if your gaze could make it catch fire faster. It doesn't. And then almost without warning, it's night again. The sun never really rises in winter. It just gets slightly less absent for a few hours before slipping away again. The sky now glows that deep navy blue that feels like a held breath. And you're back inside once more, bundled into a circle of warmth, firelight, and familiar bodies. You sit beside your brother, who somehow managed to get straw in his ears. He's humming an old folk tune under his breath, the kind passed down from someone's grandmother's grandmother, about a man who fell in love with a bread oven and turned into a loaf, or something like that. Everyone is quieter tonight. Even the goat has taken up a polite silence. The room smells of stewed cabbage and fatigue. Your father pokes the fire. One last time. There's nothing left to do, nothing more to carry. You've done enough. You survived the night, just like those before you, just like those who spun wool in the dark, who sang badly tuned songs, who laughed beside goats and prayed by fading embers. You're part of their story now, a quiet note in a long, slow song. The room around you fades gently. The shadows deepen. Even the goat is asleep now, curled in the corner like a hay-covered lump of warmth. And for once the chickens aren't plotting anything. You feel the peace that only comes at the edge of dreams, that soft, drifting state between knowing and not knowing. where time loosens its grip and the fire's last breath warms your toes. Let yourself rest. Let the cold pass. Let the stories hold you. Good night, traveler. Sleep well. End of script. Sweet dreams. Historians may never agree on what peasants really thought in these quiet hours. Did they fear death? Did they dream of spring? Did they just focus on surviving the next cough, the next freeze, the next cracked wall? You think maybe they felt a bit like you do now. Exhausted, cold, but oddly content. The world outside howls, but inside there is stillness. You are safe. You are not alone. You are wrapped in wool, smoke, and love that rarely says its name. The candle flickers once, twice, then fades. And as sleep takes you, you let go. You sink, you breathe, you rest. And now the hut goes silent. The fire has collapsed into glowing coals. The last sighs of smoke curl toward the beams. The wind outside still rattles the shutter, but gently, now, like an old friend reminding you it's still there. Your body softens into the straw. Your breath slows. Each inhale draws in the scent of earth and wool. Each exhale releases the weight of another long, cold day. Sparks rise and dance against the soot-black rafters. You watch them with heavy eyelids. The weariness of the day, the digging, the dreams, the noise, settles deep into your bones. And now comes the best part of winter giving in. You stretch out on the straw mat cloak wrapped tight around your shoulders, hands tucked under your arms. Your body molds to the uneven floor. It creaks. You creak. But it doesn't matter. Everyone around you begins to settle too. One cousin snores immediately. Your aunt whispers a prayer. The chicken fluffs its feathers and tucks its beak into its wing. The hut breathes as one slow, raspy, and tired. You stare at the ceiling. The fire glows lower now, casting soft shadows across the timbers, like the last flicker of thought before sleep. You think back to the stories you heard the dice, you rolled the songs, you hummed the goat that ate your mitten. All the small, stubborn joys that carried you through the cold.